moving right along. We talk about data. Data is sort of the underpinnings of everything we're talking about, VERGE. And so how does the web of data change? Well, everything. To talk about that, CEO of the Open Data Institute, please welcome Gavin Starks.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name's Gavin Starks. I'm the Chief Executive of the Open Data Institute. We're quite a new institute, only 3 years old, and we're co-founded by the inventor of the web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So we're really looking at this from a point of view of what's the global change here? How are we changing the world with data? The ODI is working to connect, equip, and inspire people around the world to innovate with data. And I want to talk a little bit about that scale. I was reflecting on the talk we've just had from Katie. My background is in astrophysics, and one of my reflections was that actually you can't really do that without sharing information. And in the same way, you can't build a spaceship without collaboration, without sharing information. And that's driven largely by scarcity. And when we think about the broader context of the conference today and the challenges that we face, it's really driven by that same set of requirements. When we look at the scale of the web over the last 26 years, there's nearly 1 billion websites now, hundreds of billions of web pages. But when we look at what's happening, what's coming, the scale of the web of data is going to dwarf the current web. Broadly, the amount of data is doubling every couple of years. So when we think forward to 20, 25 years from now, what scale of information are we looking at? So again, we look at population, 7 billion, more than 7 billion people today. And we look at an 11 billion population by the end of the century. How many people are connected to the web today? Well, there's over 3 billion people online today. It's quite interesting, that's about the same number of people that existed when I was born. So the scale here of the number of people who are connected is vast, but there's more machines connected to the web today than there are people, and that number is set to grow extremely quickly. Over 25 billion devices expected to be connected to the internet, not just by the end of the century, but by the end of this decade. So I want to just kind of reflect on that data are emitted by people and machines, translated into forms that people and machines can use, that help people and machines decide, things that are important to each of our worlds and the whole world, making people and machines emit more data. So we've got this wonderful cyclic piece of this where it's not just about the machines, it's not just about the humans, it's about how those things come together. This is an artwork. One of the first things that we did at the Open Data Institute was start commissioning artists to try and translate the data. How do we bring this thing alive that we can't see, it's invisible around us? This particular piece is bringing in environmental data from around South London and transforming it into a sculpture, which sits in our office and is represented inside a 3D sculpture of the artist's body. So trying to bring this idea of invisible, the invisible kind of ether of data surrounding us and combine that with our quantified self. Trying to translate this information is a really critical part of what we're trying to do. And part of that is just the language of data. How do we talk about this stuff? We have a lot of uncertainty around us. So we've created this thing called the data spectrum. And instead of talking about big data or personal data or commercial data, I don't care if it's big, medium, or small. I don't care whether it's state, government, commercial. I do care whether it's closed, and I do care whether it's shared, and I do care whether it's open. So this kind of anchor language is really important in terms of how we're moving forward, because a lot of what we hear is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. People say, well, we don't really understand this, but we know this sort of data juggernaut is upon us, and it's not stopping. But what do we do about intellectual property? What do we do about our security? What do we do about income loss if we start opening up our information? What about the quality of data? What about liability? We don't really know where to start. But I think when we think about the broader challenges we're trying to face. I'm reminded of how do we get to Mars? Well, we have some moonshots ahead of us. We have these moonshots of how to sustain 7 billion people today, whether that's energy, food, transportation, jobs, healthcare. And we're spending $200 billion a year responding to natural disasters, the majority of which are linked to climate change. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying each year due to poor air quality. So these are really substantial challenges, and at the same time, we're kind of hitting peak everything everywhere, whether that's peak coal, peak oil, peak copper. We're really running out of those resources. So what we talk about at the ODI is we talk about network thinking. How do we use the power of networks? But not in the way that we used to. How do we use the power of networks in a web-connected way, in a web of data way? This is looking at not just collaborations. So I'm going to pick some examples here that are relatively small, not talking about the fact that London, and the Transport Authority there had a 58x return on their opening up their transport information. But how this is affecting people around the world, people coming together, looking at harvest information, combining that with weather information, combining that with crop surveys, and saving millions of dollars on a localized level. Or looking at a country like Burkina Faso, using the data, and you can see in the column in the middle here, data in Burkina Faso is not necessarily how we relate to data here. But how can we use this information to drive investment decisions about where to co-locate schools that are close to services like transportation and water, and enable citizens then to engage with that and where they place their children? Or whether that's enabling smallholder farmers in Ghana to access both weather information, market information, not necessarily even via the web, via text message. And how can they engage in their own local markets, but using the global web of data to enable a greater understanding of crop yields? Or whether it's, again, back to the UK, knitting data into analysis of timesheets. Data is being used as a creative and art material, helping people to translate things out of this ethereal space into reality. So when we think about data, it's not just a set of targets or a report written. Data are part of our operational decision-making infrastructure. This word infrastructure is pretty important because when we think about the web of data, it's not just about collaboration. You can't access nearly 1 billion websites because everybody decided to collaborate with each other individually on a case-by-case basis. It's because they decided to publish. And that trend really is at the heart of this. When we think about data as infrastructure, in the same way that we think about roads, roads help us navigate to a location. And data helps us navigate to a decision. And this question about data as infrastructure is one of our core research themes at the moment. Not only what is our data infrastructure, who owns the global geospatial information, who owns the land registries around the world, who owns, in fact, is there a global set of identifiers for companies? If we're in a digitally connected economy, how are we actually going to wire together our physical worlds and our digital worlds? And part of the reflections here, if you have an asset and if you treat data as an asset, normally if you have physical assets, if they're not utilized, if they're not deployed, if they're not moving, you're losing value. And similarly with data, if your data is not connected, if it is not moving, then you are leaving value on the table. And this is very much a cultural shift. I don't meet many organizations who say, yes, we really want to open up our data. But that's changing. Governments around the world, G8 signed an open data charter, G20 have followed suit, sort of at a political level, people are moving forward, but companies are now coming to us and saying, how can they be part of this data revolution? But interestingly, when we look at the ODI network, and we've been building an international franchise, you can see the interest here is being driven from some unlikely places. This is not something that's been driven from the Valley. We have franchises in Dubai, in St. Petersburg, in Queensland, in Riyadh. Not exactly where you would immediately associate with open data, but part of an international development community. So just to reflect then on data in general and open data specifically, is changing the nature of politics, it's changing the nature of business, and it's reflecting a cultural shift to an open networked society. I think we've got a generation of people who've grown up with the web. We call them Generation Open. If you're using a search engine right now, you're part of that generation. So I'd say that's everybody in this room. So how can we work together to publish more data, to connect it? Because to solve the problems that we have ahead of us, we need us. Thank you very much. Thank you.